I think a lot of the time when politicians talk about crime, it's very vague. When you talk about crime, what are you talking about?
I remember being an intern in the emergency room and opening a chest almost every night of some young gladiator. Never thought it would happen to him. And it's tragic for many reasons. One is a young life that's not going to be able to live to its full amount, but you also have to talk to the family and the pain in their lives, which will never be forgotten, is also made worse by the fact that it was traumatic. And then I'd often see the person who shot the victim, because they often get hit as well. And there's this very deep sorrow as they realize something that is not allowed, never tolerated, yet they did it, has occurred. They took a human life. And you realize the devastation on both sides. And so I have a very visceral awareness of the impact of crime. But I can also talk about the economic impact of it, which is massive. Tens of millions of dollars of lost money just from taking care of the crime problems, but also lost revenue to the city. And I can talk about the fact that when you have lawlessness, it actually brings upon us mental health issues, which can scar us for the rest of our lives. The incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder on young Philadelphians who witnessed a murder is equivalent to that of a GI serving in a war zone. And these are scars that will last for generations. So there's an emotional part, there's an intellectual part, but at the end of it all, we're destroying our communities. And we have to get into the nitty-gritty of why that's happening. And we have to contemplate the possibility that it's because of bad policies, that things that we have tried that we hoped would work aren't, and course correct.
Speaking of policies, what can you do as a senator about crime in Pennsylvania? Is there some specific legislation that you would want to see enacted?
There's a lot of things I would do. And I want to get to the root cause and start there, but I'll walk you through the police as well, because I was endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police because they have a confidence that I can actually understand their issues. And we're sending a very bad message to first responders. We're telling cops that we don't respect what you're doing when you run to a crisis. We're going to hold you accountable if anything goes wrong. And so simple actions like body cams and encouraging community policing and putting funding into making sure that we address the fact there's a 45% increase in early retirement in police officers, and you can't find any anymore. So the federal government is going to have to get involved in this. Some of it's the subpoena power to ask cities, what are you doing? How is it possible that in a short period of time you've created changes that are not for the betterment of people living in Philadelphia? Many people here in Philly think they're part of a social experiment that's being done on them, and they don't understand where they are in the equation. How come they're not being valued? And it seems to always be the criminals who are getting all the attention. But I want to say at the federal level, there's two things I would focus on in Philadelphia right now. The first is we have got to offer school choice. These poor little children have no chance going to public schools that are failing horribly, reading at 30% grade level, and then we're paying a lot for it, but the parents of these at-risk children are not given an opportunity the parents of these at-risk children are not given an opportunity to select other schools that they love their kids and want to send them to. And that's not the standard for many other communities. Parents, if they don't like the local school, can pick another option. Here in Philadelphia, we have an archdiocese. It has about 32,000 kids, K through 8. Superb educational program. It's only $4,000 per kid. I would encourage us to build funds, and federal government can help with this, to allow parents to choose those schools. It might be the best education, but it also might be best for a lot of other reasons for those children. So that's the first thing. We have to get serious about education. The second thing that I think is critical is we are in one of the richest states in the country for energy. And none of it comes to Philadelphia to be able to be exported. We use energy from Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, but if we could build a liquid natural gas facility in the Philadelphia area, in the southeast, get it out to the ocean, here's the benefits. You'd actually help local communities across Pennsylvania because they could start drilling for natural gas. You'd build pipelines. You'd build them through Philadelphia. You'd create tens of thousands of high-quality trade jobs in the area. And the liquid natural gas that we'd be able to export would create an economy that's energy independent, drop inflation because the energy prices drive a quarter at least of inflation, and we'd help our allies overseas. The only reason, Dasha, that it doesn't exist is ideological. People on the far left end of the spectrum just think the Green New Deal is the only way forward. And as a scientist, I'll tell you, it's a dishonest narrative. It's not going to work the way they described it. We've dropped our carbon footprint in Pennsylvania and actually in America by more than almost any other Western country because of natural gas. So of course I want green energy. I want to preserve our environment because I think we owe it to our kids and our families. But natural gas from Pennsylvania is a path forward, and it would help some of the poverty and lack of wealth in our communities.
So let me ask about some specifics on crime that have been talked about at the federal level. Do you want to bring back mandatory minimums?
I really think judges should be empowered to make the difficult decisions, and they generally do it well. When we tie their hands by making laws at the federal level, it hinders their ability to do what needs to be done.
So you don't think the federal government should bring those back?
I prefer the federal government not get involved in draconian rules that do not allow judges to judge.
What about the death penalty for drug dealers, which your endorser Trump has advocated for?
I think that a appropriate, potentially death penalty, but an appropriate harsh penalty for people especially bringing fentanyl into this country, and this is important, making it look like candy, which is how a lot of these crises are happening. That, if a child dies taking candy that looks like fentanyl, or fentanyl looks like candy, that's a problem, and that's a murder. So however you treat murder should be how you treat those folks, and it might be the death penalty.
And on the topic of drugs, do you support President Biden's pardon of people who were convicted on federal drug crimes charged solely on simple possession of marijuana?
Going to jail for marijuana is not a wise move for the country. I think folks who have used marijuana, and that's the only reason they're in jail, should not have those criminal those rulings held against them as they try to engage.
So you support the president's move there?
I think that the move is a rational move, yeah.
You've hit your opponent hard on his record on crime. Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman's proud of what he did as head of Board of Pardons here in Pennsylvania. He says he believes in second chances. The former president, with his First Step Act, also was about giving second chances to prisoners who deserve it. Why don't prisoners who prove good behavior, who are model prisoners, why don't they deserve second chances?
The First Step Act had nothing to do with convicted murderers being released from prison, especially after they've been sentenced to life in prison. It's a whole different game. What we're talking about now is a draconian shift, a dramatic change from what we have talked about when we're dealing with some of the incarceration issues that have plagued the country. Someone who's hurt a family, and I'll give you some specific cases, but there was a man who stabbed his girlfriend's mother to death with scissors, and tried to pin it on her, and he was convicted by the jury. A judge sentenced him to life in prison. When John Fetterman says he learned yoga in prison, he learned horticulture in prison, it doesn't square with me, that's his wording, that this person could have done these crimes, we should release them. And no one else on the parole board think that's right. Well, really? That's the person you want to go after? When John Fetterman is asked, if you could wave a magic wand, what's the one thing you would do? The one thing. And he says, well, I'd get rid of life in prison. Really? I mean, I'd fix the economy. Actually, I don't need a magic wand to do that. I can just get serious about stuff that's affecting a lot of people. Getting rid of life in prison is not the number one goal.
Well, I asked him that. He actually said it would be codifying Roe versus Wade and abolishing the filibuster.
Yeah, well, he's answered it the way I just described it in the past as well. But these are issues of priority. And for me, I prioritize the innocent over the victim, and too often over the criminal. And too often, John Fetterman seems to pay more attention to the feelings of the criminals than the innocent who were hurt. And when the families don't want these people released, and John Fetterman's pushing it hard and even cajoling and sometimes some argue coercing other parole board members to go along with them, it raises concerns. One
of the big issues around crime here in Philadelphia is gun violence. It was talked about in that room back there. You say on your campaign website that every law-abiding American citizen should be allowed to buy the gun of their desire. But back in 2018, you tweeted that folks should contact their congressperson to demand they fund the CDC to study gun violence, saying it's time we treat shootings like a public health problem. If you're in Congress, how will you square those two issues?
Well, I think they're squared right now. I'm researching where we are with our mental health issues, with the crime that we see in the streets is a good investment for our country. And the more we put in the mental health services, which is what this new gun law did, the better off we're going to be, because that's the real deep issue. When that 19-year-old man shot the 3 SWAT officers last night, 2 nights ago, it was probably a suicide effort, because why else would you shoot SWAT officers? And the mental health that he was suffering from, and again, I don't understand the subtleties of his particular case, but were probably significant. And the issues with the Second Amendment are separate. Second Amendment is literally saying you have a right to bear arms in our country. And I'm supportive of the Second Amendment for that reason. But there are lots of things we can do to make the rules that we currently have on the books more effective.
Is there any gun control measure that you would support in Congress?
I think the rules we have right now that especially allow us to identify people who are at high risk, because it's already out there, and there are registries for this.
Red flag laws, things like that?
It's not red flag laws. I have major concerns about those because they can be misused. I'm talking about the currently existing fixed NICS system. And the national identification database that we have doesn't get all the data into it that it needs. And that's the data that local communities would use to identify if there was a problem.
At your Safer Streets event a few weeks ago that we came to, you handed out a pamphlet with a lot of information. In one section called Justice for George Floyd, you said racial targeting is unacceptable. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
I don't, because I think it was a hijacked effort to address some of the deep problems we have with race in America. And I don't think the Black Lives Movement did justice to the real struggle that we have. I've worked in these areas quite a bit, both as a clinician, but also on the show. We started #MoreBlackDoctors because there's some obvious problems that happen in the practice of medicine when it comes to black folks. For example, black children have neonates at 2 times increased chance of dying if they're getting cared for by a white doctor over a black doctor. And so the question is why? I mean, we all love our babies, right? But there's some cultural differences that cause mishaps, and questions don't get asked, and issues don't get addressed. And so by getting more black doctors to practice in medicine, I think we deal with one of the core root problems. And one thing I've learned in medicine, Dasha, is you can treat the symptoms all you want, and you should if you can, but you have to get to the root cause. What's really the problem that we need to address? And in the case of medicine, if we're going to deal with race issues, we have to have more black doctors who feel like they're part of the system and encourage more black people to become members of the healthcare system. Speaking
of symptoms in medicine, your opponent is recovering from a stroke. One of your campaign staffers said that John Fetterman wouldn't have had a stroke if he had, quote, ever eaten a vegetable in his life. Your campaign also mocked the accommodations that Fetterman asked for in the debate, saying that you'd, quote, pay for any additional medical personnel he might need to have on standby. And, quote, at any point, John Fetterman can raise his hand and say, bathroom break. You're a doctor. You're a heart doctor. You, of all people, understand what John Fetterman is going through better than most. Why would you allow your campaign to mock him like that?
I have tremendous compassion for what John Fetterman is going through. I mean, not only do I, as a doctor, appreciate the challenges, but I know his specific ailment because it's a specialty area of mine, heart failure and atrial fibrillation and stroke. The campaign has been difficult for both teams. I'm looking forward to talking to John Fetterman face-to-face about both of our staffs when we're on that stage. It has been surprising to me that he's been unwilling. I've never met the man. The two of us are vying to represent the people of Pennsylvania. And I've never been able to look to him eye to eye and talk about the real substantive issues that are causing pain in Pennsylvania.
But look, this is your campaign, right? These are your employees. Doesn't the buck stop with you? Isn't that what a leader accepts?
Oh, I accept the responsibility, and I deal with issues as they come up. But he has his own set of issues, and I think we need to look, again, eye to eye and say, here's what we're going to do going forward. We should have had a debate already. The absentee ballots have already been sent out, Dasha. There are people, my friends are sending me their ballots as an example that hey, I'm a good American, I voted. And yet I've never been able to talk to him and allow him to explain his far-left radical ideas to me, and him challenge me as well. That's what democracy is supposed to be about. And what's harmful about this is when John Fetterman is not out there answering questions from me, from voters on the campaign trail, it creates a barrier, a block. So it's very hard to understand what he would do. We are literally in Pennsylvania doing a bit of an experiment. John Fetterman is not known by most people besides his commercials. So we're going to see if commercials by themselves can get someone elected. Because he's not out there, as I have been. I've done over 225 campaign stops, talking all summer long and now into the fall with people and taking questions like you're asking now, press gaggles like we just did, town halls and the like, where people can quiz me and query me. It is imperative that in American democracy, we owe it to each other to do that.
But would you ever talk to your patients like this?
No.
Do you believe that someone with a disability or temporary disability like this can't serve, can't be a senator?
Well, I think people with disabilities can serve, and they should serve. I would never hold that against anybody. The issue for me is the voters of Pennsylvania deserve transparency. When you were asking questions of John Fetterman about his medical records, I was watching his responses and thinking, he probably does want to release his records, but he's not. So why not?
Did he show courage by sitting down with us and being open and showing us what it's like to recover from this kind of stroke?
Yes, and I wish he had done it months earlier, because it would have allowed him to get out more and talk to people and gotten folks comfortable with where he is. But some of the issues that he has been pressured on by the press, it's not even me in my campaign, but we've had some of the major, you quoted the New York Times in your interview, Washington Post, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, they've all said, you have to show us your medical records, you have to go out and debate, you've got to do the things, as Pat Toomey said, whose job we're trying to fill, that demonstrates that you can represent the people of Pennsylvania. When people ask me questions, and they often do, about his health condition, you know what I say, Josh? I have no idea, because literally I don't know anything more than you know, because I've only seen a few fragments of data from a doctor who took care of him 5 years ago, saw him again once. You know, what really happened when he got sick?
And look, we pressed for clarity from him on health. We also pressed for clarity from him on the issue of crime, on the issue of abortion. And I do want to ask you about that, because I've talked to voters who are confused about where you stand. In a 2019 interview, you said you were concerned about imposing abortion restrictions, saying, quote, I don't want to interfere with everyone else's stuff because it's hard enough to get through life as it is. But now you've called abortion murder. What's changed?
I've always been pro-life. In that interview you mentioned, I said I was pro-life. I had 3 exceptions, which I feel strongly about: the life of the mother, rape, and incest. And I also feel very strongly the federal government should not, I'll repeat, should not get involved in states' issues around abortion, because abortion is, and I've dealt with these issues as a clinician. I understand how difficult and sensitive it is. You should have local values percolating through local medicine, expressed through your local government. That's how we make decisions around the issues that are completely around our personal values. I don't want the federal government dictating to Pennsylvanians what women here are going to do. Let Pennsylvania voters and their legislators and their doctors to figure that out and come up with solutions like we currently have.
And I know you've answered this question several times about the Lindsey Graham bill, the 15-week national abortion ban. You've said that the federal government shouldn't get involved in this. I talk to voters, and they are very tired of politicians giving politician answers to questions like that are yes or no questions, right? You're going to be, if you win, you're going to be a colleague of his. You're going to have to vote on bills like this. So can you tell us right now, yes or no on that bill?
I'm giving you a bigger answer than yes or no. I'm telling you, I don't want any federal rules limiting what states do with abortion. It should be up to the states. That's the exact purpose of the place that we're in right now in America, to allow local people with local values and their local communities to make these decisions.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.